The duties of those in the honor guard vary, from presidential receptions to adding color at formal political functions to the president's inaugural ceremonies and officiating at military funerals and funerals for heads of state. Honor guards also serve at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and as guides at the Pentagon. When I passed the final test for the guard, I could choose between training for rifle duty or for funeral detail. I chose the latter. Hour after hour, I practiced lugging caskets weighted with sandbags up the grassy slopes of Arlington Cemetery. I stood through long, tearful eulogies, learning not to respond emotionally. Finally, practice became reality. I could go through an entire funeral procession, a graveside service, and a 21 gun salute without a muscle twitch in my face. I thought I'd conquered my feelings until our captain assigned our team to the Scobie funeral. The Challenger space shuttle tragedy had stunned America and had devastated the men in the Air Force. Commander Francis R. Scobie was one of us, a pilot who'd made it to the top in his field. The morning the explosion occurred, I peeled out of the recreation room at Fort Myer. I was in between funerals at Arlington before the television commentator could complete his report. Despite the sub-zero weather, I tried to run off my emotions. An unusual silence gripped our team members as we prepared for the funeral. None of the usual banter could be heard as we boarded the bus and drove to Arlington National Cemetery. My job that bitingly cold January morning was crowd control, in particular corralling the members of the press. In their eagerness to get better camera shots, they often strayed beyond their cordoned area. My job was to chase them back. As we climbed the great hillside that morning, I stayed near the rear of the casket to monitor the reporters and photographers. The news personnel jostled one another for space behind the gold cord as the guards set the casket in place. As the mourners gathered about the grave, I felt grateful that I had something to do to keep my mind off the drawn faces of the commander's family. The graveside ceremony progressed without penetrating my practiced military defense until Commander Scobie's brother lifted his trumpet to play taps. I could no longer choke back my tears when his notes quivered, then broke. I sniffed a few times, but nothing would stop the flow. Fearful I'd made a spectacle of myself, I shot a glance at the other men in my unit. No one was concerned about my break in self-control, for tears streamed down their faces as well. A photographer chose that moment to lean across the restraining cord for a better shot of the trumpeter. Bless you, I thought, as I waved him back into place. The disturbance gave me a moment to regain my composure. Riding back to the dormitory, I scolded myself. I couldn't believe it. Jeeps might lose control of their emotions on an assignment, but not seasoned guards. Yet lose control I did. And on my first official assignment. Then there came an assignment none of the other guards wanted. It was a $1,000 plate charity banquet. To an experienced guard, it promised to be boring, but to me it sounded incredibly exciting. So I was overjoyed when I was chosen. My commander laughed at my eagerness and allowed me to fill the assignment. When our bus arrived at the hotel in the district, we were surprised to see workers installing metal detectors at the doors. I asked a buddy if such tight security was used for every official function. My friend laughed. Not usually, he said. Now, even the military brass and the members of Congress must be paranoid about terrorist attacks. I shrugged it off. I had too many exciting things to consider. My gaze took in the mirrors, gold and crystal chandeliers, and the gleaming marble floors of the posh hotel. I wanted to recall every detail of the evening, to share with my folks in Portland. Our sergeant in command led us to a side room where we changed into our dress uniforms. When the sergeant assigned me my responsibility to open the front door to the banquet hall for the guests, I snapped off a crisp salute, smartly clicking my heels. He looked at me through half-closed eyes and shook his head. Deliver me from Jeeps and their enthusiasm. Proud to be wearing my crisp new uniform, I couldn't keep from grinning as I stood by the ornately carved doors. I'd been at my post for less than 15 minutes when a colonel approached. I whipped off a salute and reached for the door handle. The colonel eyed me curiously. You like your job, don't you, son? Yes, sir. Most guards don't enjoy this job. No, sir. And you do? Yes, sir. A strange little smile crossed the colonel's face. Come with me, son. I have a different assignment for you tonight. Yes, sir. He took me to the front of the banquet hall, to the door on the right side of the podium. I want you to stand here till I give you a signal to open the door. Got it? Yes, sir. Standing inside the elegant banquet hall proved to be more entertaining than standing outside in the hallway. The waiters bustled about, adding last-minute details to the tables. The musicians clustered to one side of the dais, tuning up their instruments, and various military brass scurried through one door to another and to another, each intent on his or her own assignment. Reporters and photographers jostled one another for position. TV technicians ran wires from the microphones on the podium to the control room. Before long, the evening guests began to arrive. Members of Congress and their spouses strode into the ballroom. Decorated generals from all 5 branches of the armed forces, along with their spouses, were escorted to their tables. Important business people arrived as well. My excitement grew as I realized how many of the guests I recognized from the television evening news. However, I never took my attention too far from the colonel who would signal me to open the door. He trusted me with this post, and I didn't want to miss his signal. I would not pull a Gomer on such an important occasion. With all the excitement, I considered who might be on the other side of the door when I opened it. Probably a 4-star something or other, I imagined. When the colonel counted 3, 2, 1, and pointed at me, I grasped the brass door handle and with my pristine white gloves opened the door, clicked my heels together, and saluted. My lower jaw dropped to the brass buttons on my chest. Entering through the open doorway came, not a general, or a representative, or a senator, but the Commander-in-Chief, Ronald Reagan. Cameras flashed, the band played Hail to the Chief, and I froze in horror. Oh no, I've done it again. I knew I was in deep trouble this time. As a new guard, I hadn't received my presidential clearance yet. The president smiled at me and asked, How are you doing tonight, Airman? How are you doing? I boasted to my fellow guards about what I'd say if I had ever met President Reagan in person. I wanted to ask him about his welfare plan, about the growing national debt, about the tax program for middle income Americans, about the slashing of student loans. But there, face to face with my commander in chief, I blanked. All I could do was stutter. The president turned to his aide. I guess he's a little nervous, he said. The aide nodded and escorted Mr. Reagan to the platform. At the podium, Reagan waved to his loyal followers until the music and applause faded. He told the audience he'd decided to attend the gala less than 45 minutes ago. As he prepared to give his speech, he paused as if he had lost his train of thought, shook his head, and grinned, then mumbled something about that airman at the door. Cameras flashed in my face, and the press recorded the embarrassment lingering on my face. It wasn't long after I entered the Guard that an opening occurred for a year's stint as a narrator at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. I figured I had a good voice and would try out for one of the 5 positions. Along with 49 other guards, I applied. Again and again, I practiced the script I'd been given. But on the day of the audition, when I saw so many others applying, old terms popped back up in my head. Retarded, dummy, stupid. Just before my turn came to audition, I grew scared. Really scared. So scared that I ran and hid like an 8-year-old boy. I couldn't believe it. Even as I cowered in my hiding place, I'd run away. The next day, when the commander asked me why I missed my audition, I brushed him off with, "I changed my mind." That evening, I picked up a book about reaching for your dreams, written by Robert Schuller. I read all night. In the morning, I went to the commander and told him the entire story. As a result, the commander broke regulations to give me a special audition. My audition went so smoothly that the audition committee applauded when I finished. They appointed me to the only position to be filled at that time. One day I saw an announcement on the bulletin board about an English class. I decided it was time for me to face my demons once and for all. I'd take the class. I would improve my reading. I did fine until it came to the final test. I hated tests. While in school, I would do anything I could to avoid taking tests. But this time, I would not run. As I stared at the typed sheets in front of me, I reminded myself that I had already passed the difficult tests necessary for getting into the Guard. I examined the test sheets before me. These were hardly more than vocabulary tests, similar to what I took in Mrs. Winter's English classes back in high school. One by one, I finished the questions and gave the completed form to the instructor. Painfully, I watched as the red pen highlighted the wrong answers. When the instructor finished, she looked across the desk at me. "Man, your tutor must have been outstanding." "Excuse me? My tutor?" "The one who helped you with your dyslexia. Must have been a genius." I scowled. "Dyslexia? What dyslexia?" "Your parents must have spent a bundle on you." I don't know what you're talking about. My parents never had that kind of money." She ignored my remarks. "Airman Johnson, you just might be the first person with a disability ever to be in the President's Honor Guard." I stared at her in confusion. I removed my glasses. She removed her glasses. "Don't you know that you have dyslexia in the 3rd grade? How in the world did you pass your Air Force admissions tests, let alone the psychological and military aptitude tests? There's no way." "I have what?" I still wasn't comprehending. "Do you have trouble reading and spelling?" I remembered Mrs. Pennyworth's classes and stiffened. "Yes, ma'am. That's because you have dyslexia, a reading disorder. She went on to explain that people with dyslexia often see letters backwards. Sometimes the letters dance around the page. I listened in amazement. How did she know? Often such students are considered underachievers because their brains can't process the words correctly. You must have had some of the best tutors around. For a person of your degree of dyslexia, you've reached a point where it is almost undetectable. She studied my folder once again. I mentally jogged through my grade school years in academy. As far as I know, I've never had a tutor in my entire life. My brother's girlfriend Jennifer had once helped me with spelling, but that was all I could bring to mind. The woman chuckled and shook her head. You just don't remember. There is no way in the world you could have passed the Air Force exams without at least 2 years of college classwork. I thought for a moment. My parents have been praying about my lack of reading skills for years. I know that God has helped me with my reading problem. Otherwise, I didn't even know I had this dyslexia thing. The examiner's eyes glazed over at the mention of God, but I continued. In high school, I had an English teacher, Mrs. Winters, who worked with me after class. She had me read a chapter of the Bible aloud until I could read it perfectly. And in third grade, Mrs. No, 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 I don't believe it. There must be some record here of a special trained tutor or coach. Mrs. Winter's granddaughter helped me sometimes. No, that wouldn't do it either. Your progress would have taken years of intensified training, costing thousands of dollars. Thousands of dollars? I laughed. My parents never had that much money in their entire lives. It had to be the Bible. The examiner shook her head. The Bible? Let me tell you about myself. I smiled and relaxed a little. When I was in the first and second grade, I told her about Mrs. Pennyworth, my elementary and secondary experience, and my military career thus far. You see, considering all he's done for me, I'm not surprised to learn that God and His Word have been my tutors all along. By the way, could my problem, this dyslexia, have affected other areas of my life as well? Absolutely. As I returned to my dormitory room, everything began to make sense. Dyslexia. Of course, it would affect my reading as a kid, my marching, and several other problems I'd been facing in military. Imagine, I thought. God helped me overcome a disability I didn't even know I had. Here I was on a new adventure, one that far surpassed any dream I might have had for my life. Now that my problem had been identified, what could go wrong? It would be smooth riding the rest of the way. However, a native Northwesterner knows that every road has its potholes. A pothole in my road to the honor guard took the form of Wes Connors. Not his real name. A guardsman who hated me from the first time we met. Throughout my life, I'd come up against people who disliked me, either because of my dyslexia or my color. So Wes's animosity was nothing new. When people treated me like this, I set out to change their minds. Edwin Markham wrote a poem called Outwitted. He drew a circle that shut me out. Heretic, rebel, a thing to flout. But love I had the wit to win. We drew a circle that took him in. I would simply win Wes over by including him in my circle of love. With most people, my method of fighting prejudice with kindness worked, but not with Wes Connors. He hated my skin color, He hated my personality. He hated my positive attitude. But most of all, he hated my faith in God. One evening, each week, a group of trainees would meet to study the Bible and pray together. Far from home for the first time, I learned early in my military experience that I needed the prayers and encouragement of my friends. Since I wasn't the only airman who felt this need, we banded together for support. Our prayer circle irritated Wes. In being a loudmouth and self-proclaimed atheist, he let his opinions be known. Inasmuch as I was the de facto leader for the prayer group, he aimed his barbs at the preacher boy, me. Every opportunity he found to mock, to poke fun at me or my religion, he used it. He considered men who believed in God to be wimps or pantywaists. He claimed that they couldn't stand on their own 2 feet. His turns occurred most often when we were on assignment. At times I wanted to flatten him, to show him that my bulk was far from weak. I fantasized about the surprised look I'd see on his face when I sent him flying onto his backside. Just once. I fantasized just once. Yet I knew slugging Wes Connors was not an option for me. Not because Wes was so tough, but because everyone knew I claimed to be a Christian. And trouncing one's enemies was not part of the Christian code. In my short time in the honor guard to this point, I had discovered that we often spent several hours on the bus, riding to and from assignments. To pass that time, I packed a couple paperback books or a New Testament to read. Sometimes I'd bring along extra reading material for other guys to borrow as well. One humid midsummer morning, our entire unit headed for the White House for a flag ceremony. Canada's Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, and his wife were visiting the Reagans. During the morning's full uniform inspection, we'd been warned to bring along our smelling salts. It would be a long ceremony in stifling temperatures. We'd be standing at attention in the sun, a perfect day to flake. Flaking or passing out while at attention before the President of the United States or some other high political personage brings shame and embarrassment to your entire branch of the military. While friendly banter flowed between the 5 branches, the Air Force, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, and the Coast Guard. Each branch claimed to be tougher and better trained than the others. No one wanted to appear weak or to fail their branch, and a flake was considered the worst of the transgressions for a guard. Pictures of any guard who fainted could end up on the cover of the Washington Post or Times. I felt along the rim of my hat for the tiny flask of ammonia I hoped I'd never need. Wes Connors began taunting me before we boarded the honor guard bus that morning. "So, holy boy, who's going to flake today?" he asked. He glanced at the Bible in my hand. "I see you brought along your magic book, Johnson." I ignored his jibes, but he continued. "You know your God is nothing more than a spook, a figment of your imagination." I turned my back, refusing to give him the satisfaction of an answer. The guardsman behind me took on my cause. "Hey, Wes, knock it off, will you? Leave Johnson alone." Wes snarled at him out of the corner of his mouth. "Figures a wimp like Johnson needs someone else to fight his battles." Another guardsman overheard Wes's jibes. "Cut it out, Wes. You're just spoiling for a fight." Wes snorted as he climbed onto the bus. "Humph. No threat from that panty waist." When I boarded, I noted that Wes had chosen to sit in the back. I decided to choose a seat as far from him as possible. Good choice, Johnson, Wes shouted. If you came back here, you might have to stand up for something. He laughed at his own joke. The guards around him didn't. One of these times, you're going to get Johnson mad enough to fight. The man on Wes's right warned. Ho, ho. Right. Holy boy might fight me and get his halo bent. Wes hooted with laughter. I fought the anger building inside of me and determinedly stared out the bus window. I swiped at the sweat dripping down the sides of my face. The air conditioning on the bus couldn't keep pace with the heat and humidity of the day, nor could it cool the fury rising inside of me. Hey, holy boy, why don't you ask your God to give us some shade out there today? As if he could. Give it a break, Wes, someone called out. Connors wouldn't be silenced. Pack your clothes, holy boy. You're leaving today. You're going to flake. I gripped the seat back in front of me and rose part way. Wes, that's enough. Old big threat, Wes mimicked me in a high, childish voice. You know, Wes, I pointed my finger at him. You could flake, you know. Me? The guardsman laughed. Hey, I've been a guard for a long time. I've had worse assignments than this. You'll fall out long before I will. He preened before the attention of the rest of the guards. Why, even God himself couldn't make me fall out. Silence descended on the busload of guards. A sergeant seated in the front of the bus turned around. Okay, Connors, you're pushing it too far. Wes blinked his eyes in innocence. Hey, Sarge, what can I say? It's true. Even Johnson's God couldn't make me flake. A chill skittered up my spine. I shook my head at Wes. Connors, you should never have said that. Wes threw back his head and laughed. Like I'm scared. We arrived at the White House and donned our dress uniforms. Locating the Wyoming state flag, the one assigned for me to carry, I fell into line. A Marine behind me jabbed me in the back and joked, Good day for a flake, eh, flyboy? Not on your life, jarhead, I retorted. Out front on the lawn, the White House porticos, president, presidential aide, White House staff, the press, television crews, about 400 in all gathered. A tangle of cords and microphones trailed up to the lectern that had been placed in the center of the first landing. The honor guards each carried a state flag, would form the colorful backdrop for the ceremony honoring the Prime Minister Mulroney and his wife. On cue, we marched into place up the stairs of the portico and onto the balcony behind the dais. 5, 10, 15 minutes passed. We stood at attention. The sun bore down on our heads. Our polyester woolen uniforms itched. Sweat oozed down our backs and necks. More time passed. The president and the prime minister were running far behind their schedule. But who's going to interrupt the president of the United States and our closest ally? More time passed. I tried to focus my thoughts on anything but the intolerable conditions I had to endure. I'd been given a lot of I'd been giving a lot of thought to my future after I left the honor guard. Discovering that my learning problems had a name, dyslexia, was not a sign of mental retardation, but befuddled my thought process. Maybe college, a 4-year program, would be nice, and maybe the childhood dream of becoming a preacher just might be possible after all. My mind expanded with the possibilities. I snapped alert as the first strains of Hail to the Chief filled the sultry air. The doors swung open, and the President and Mulroney walked out into the sunlight. Mrs. Reagan and Mrs. Mulroney followed. Cameras flashed with the usual cacophony of whirs and clicks. The President stepped up to the podium and began speaking. The longer he talked, the hotter the sun became. Reagan showed no signs of reaching the end of his prepared speech. I took long, slow, and deep breaths and thought cool thoughts. Climbing snow-covered Mount Hood, a dip in the Pacific Ocean at Cannon Beach, swimming in the Columbia River. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a movement on the opposite side of the President. A flag along the balcony wavered. What followed broke up the entire ceremony. The loud crack of the flagpole hitting the concrete sounded like a gunshot, causing President Reagan to jump. Secret Service men reached inside their jackets for their guns, at the same time scanning the audience for the would-be assassin. Wes had wobbled back and forth, then collapsed. His flag rolled down several steps. The sergeant behind Wes snatched the vial from his own hat rim and shoved it under Wes's nose. Electrified into action by the sudden movement, the press located the source of the disturbance and had a riotous field day, recording for posterity the flaking of the guardsmen. Also recorded forever was the small stream of water that trickled down the steps from where Wes sat. Bewildered and dismayed, he'd wet his pants. A final coup de grace to what went down in the Air Force Honor Guard history as the worst flaking ever recorded. On the bus trip back to the base that night, Wes didn't say much. Neither did the other guards. But at our Monday night prayer time, the size of our group doubled. I guess the men didn't want to take any chances with our God. Much later, Wes and I became friends. So many times I've been tempted to solve my problems with Wes by myself. In the end, God's method worked better than anything I could have imagined.